The rain hammered down on the cobblestone streets of Mayfair like angry fists from the heavens. Lightning cracked across the black London sky, illuminating for one brief, violent second. A young woman standing alone before the towering iron gates of Blackwood House. Her cloak was soaked through, clinging to her trembling frame. In her gloved hand, she clutched an old, crumpled letter, its edges torn from years of being read, and reread, and wept over. Victoria Langford, 23 years old, lifted her chin, rain streaming down her face, like tears she refused to shed. She raised her fist and pounded on the massive oak door with all the fury in her broken heart. "Open this door." Her voice cut through the storm, raw and trembling, yet fierce. "Open it now, or I swear I will burn this cursed house to the ground." The door finally creaked open, and there he stood. Marcus Blackwood, the Duke of Westhaven, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black, as if mourning something that had never truly died. His stormy gray eyes locked onto hers with the sharpness of a blade, cold, unyielding, dangerous. For one heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. Only the sound of rain and her own ragged breathing filled the silence. Victoria's chest heaved, her fingers tightened around the letter until her knuckles turned white. "You," she whispered, voice cracking with years of pain and rage. "You killed my father." Marcus didn't flinch, but something dark flickered behind those ice-cold eyes. He stepped forward, his deep voice low and commanding, cutting through the rain like thunder. "Miss Langford, you are either very brave or very foolish." Victoria lifted the crumpled letter between them, her hand shaking. "This letter says otherwise, Your Grace. My father died with your name on his lips, cursing the secret you buried, the secret that destroyed my family, that stole everything from us." Her voice broke, but she forced herself to continue, eyes blazing with unshed tears. "Tonight, you will answer for it, because I have nothing left to lose." Marcus stared at her for a long moment. The rain continued to pour, soaking them both. For the first time in years, the Duke of Westhaven looked unsettled. He slowly opened the door wider. "Then come inside, Miss Langford," he said quietly, his voice rough, with something that might have been warning or regret. "Because once you cross this threshold, there is no turning back." The heavy oak door of Blackwood House closed behind Victoria, with a final echoing thud that sounded far too much like the sealing of a fate she could no longer escape. She stood dripping onto the marble floor of the grand entrance hall, her soaked cloak leaving small puddles at her feet. The letter in her hand suddenly felt heavier than stone. Marcus Blackwood regarded her with those cold gray eyes, his voice low and controlled. "You will stay here, Miss Langford, under my roof, until you can prove every accusation you have thrown at me, or until you admit how deeply mistaken you are." Victoria lifted her chin, even as fear twisted in her stomach. "I'm not afraid of you, Your Grace." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, but it never reached his eyes. "Good, because fear would only make this more difficult." The next days passed in a tense, suffocating silence. Victoria was given a beautiful suite in the East Wing, far too luxurious for someone who had come as an accuser. Servants moved like shadows, watching her every step. She felt like a prisoner, wrapped in silk and crystal chandeliers. Late one afternoon, while Marcus was away at Parliament, Victoria slipped into the private library. Dust motes danced in the slanted light as she pulled open drawer after drawer, heart-pounding. She was searching for proof. Instead, she found the first crack in her own truth. A small leather-bound journal. Her father's handwriting. Pages filled with desperate entries about debts, about promises made to the old Duke, about a terrible mistake he had hidden for years. A mistake that had nearly destroyed the Blackwood family. Victoria's hands began to shake. No, she whispered, sinking slowly onto the velvet chair. This can't be right. Tears blurred her vision as the carefully built walls of her hatred started to crumble. The man she had blamed for everything, the man she'd come to destroy, might not be the monster she believed. That evening, Marcus found her still sitting there, the journal open on her lap. He stopped in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the hallway light. For a moment, neither of them spoke. You were never supposed to see that, he said quietly. Victoria looked up, her voice raw with pain. My father, he betrayed you. He betrayed your family. And I spent years hating the wrong man. Marcus stepped closer. Something in his guarded expression softened just slightly. I tried to protect what was left of his honor. For your sake? Even after everything? Victoria's breath caught. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, now the weight of secrets he had carried alone for so long. But before she could respond, the door burst open. Victoria, Lady Beatrice Langford, swept in her elegant gown, whispering against the floor, her face flushed with anger and something sharper. Jealousy. I came as soon as I heard you were foolish enough to move into this house. Have you lost your mind? You're ruining any chance I have at a respectable marriage by associating our name with this scandal. Victoria stood slowly, wiping her eyes. Beatrice, please. You don't understand? I understand perfectly, her sister hissed, glancing at Marcus with clear suspicion. You're throwing away our future for some childish quest for revenge. Father is gone. Let the dead stay buried. Marcus watched the exchange in silence, his jaw tight. Victoria felt torn in two. The sister she had once adored now looked at her with cold calculation. The man she had come to accuse now carried a quiet pain that mirrored her own. That night, alone in her grand bedroom, Victoria pressed her forehead against the cool window glass, staring out at the rain-slicked gardens. Everything she thought she knew was fracturing. And worst of all, she was beginning to see Marcus Blackwood not as an enemy, but as a man carrying wounds as deep as her own. Down the hall in his private study, Marcus poured himself a glass of brandy, staring into the fire. He had not expected her courage. He had not expected her pain to feel so familiar. And he certainly had not expected the dangerous pull he now felt toward the woman who had stormed into his life with nothing but fury and a crumpled letter. The truth was a double-edged blade, and both of them were already bleeding. The weight of the journal still pressed on Victoria's chest, like a stone she could not set down. Days blurred into one another inside the silent walls of Blackwood House. Then one gray afternoon, the heavy brass knocker sounded again. Mr. Samuel Whitaker, a quiet, sharp-eyed lawyer with silver at his temples, was shown into the drawing room. He carried a thin leather portfolio that seemed to hold the power to break what little remained of Victoria's world. Marcus stood near the fireplace, arms crossed. Victoria sat stiffly on the edge of the settee, her hands folded so tightly, her nails bit into her palms. Mr. Whitaker placed the documents on the low table between them. I'm afraid there is no gentle way to say this, Miss Langford. He opened the folder. Page after page revealed the truth in cold black ink. Her father had not merely made a mistake. He had deliberately sold confidential information about the Blackwood estates to their enemies. All for money. Greed had driven him to betray the family he once served. Victoria stared at the papers until the words swam. A soft, broken sound escaped her throat. I spent years hating you, her voice cracked. She looked up at Marcus, eyes shining with unshed tears. I came here ready to destroy you, when all this time the real poison was in my own blood. Marcus remained silent for a long moment. The firelight flickered across his strong jaw. You were grieving, he said finally, his tone rough. Grief makes weapons of us all. That same evening, the rumors began to spread through London like wildfire. Whispers followed Victoria wherever she went, the desperate daughter trying to trap the Duke with old scandals. At a crowded soiree, she was forced to attend the gossip turned vicious. A group of ladies blocked her path near the refreshment table, their fans fluttering like poisonous butterflies. Before the first cruel word could land, Marcus appeared at her side. His hand rested lightly at the small of her back, steady and warm. "Forgive me, ladies," he said, voice smooth as polished steel. "My guest and I were just leaving." He guided her through the crowd and out onto the quiet terrace away from prying eyes. Victoria's breath came fast and shallow. "You didn't have to do that." Marcus turned to face her. Rain from earlier in the day still glistened on the stone balustrade. "I won't let them tear you apart for sins that were never yours." For the first time, Victoria truly looked at him. Not as the cold Duke, not as her enemy, but as a man who carried his own invisible scars. Later that night, unable to sleep, she packed a small valise in the dim light of her room. Shame burned in her chest. She could not stay here any longer. She had brought nothing but pain into his house. She was reaching for her cloak when the door opened softly. Marcus stood there, candlelight casting long shadows across his face. Running away, Miss Langford Victoria froze, heart hammering. I thought it would be better if I left, before I cause you any more harm." He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The single candle between them flickered, throwing golden light and deep darkness across the room. Marcus crossed the space, slowly stopping just inches away. "You think leaving will erase what's happening between us?" His voice was low, almost a whisper. Victoria's lips trembled. "I don't know what's happening anymore." For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Marcus lifted his hand, hesitating just before his fingers brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was gentle, almost reverent. "I have spent years locking my heart away," he murmured. "After what your father did, after what I lost, I told myself I would never let anyone close again." He searched her eyes, his own filled with quiet storm. "But you stormed through my door in the rain and made that impossible." Victoria's breath caught. The air between them felt alive, charged with everything neither dared name yet. She should step back. She should run. Instead, she whispered, "I'm so sorry. For all of it." Marcus's hand lingered near her face. "So am I." In that fragile moment, under the soft glow of a single candle, something shifted. The sharp edge of hatred that had once burned between them began to melt into a different kind of fire. A fire neither of them was ready to name, but both could already feel. Down the corridor, Lord Thomas Harrington waited in Marcus's study, nursing a glass of port. When Marcus finally returned, his oldest friend looked at him with quiet understanding. "You're falling," my friend Thomas said gently. "And for once, maybe that's not a weakness." Marcus didn't deny it. He only stared into the dying fire, the weight of old pain and new longing warring inside his chest. Victoria lay awake long after the candle had burned low, her fingers still tingling from where Marcus had almost touched her. The truth had cut deeper than any lie ever could, and yet, for the first time in years, she did not feel entirely alone in the dark. The rain returned that night heavier than before, beating against the tall windows of Blackwood House like a restless heart that refused to be silenced. Victoria could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus's face in the candlelight. The way his fingers had hovered near her cheek, the quiet storm in his gray eyes. She rose, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and walked barefoot down the dimly lit corridor toward the library. Marcus was already there. He stood by the massive fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel, staring into the flames, as if they held answers he did not want to hear. When she stepped into the room, he turned slowly. The air between them felt thick, charged with everything they had not yet dared to say. Victoria's voice came out soft, trembling. "I need to speak with you tonight." Marcus nodded once, but his shoulders tensed. She moved closer, stopping just beyond the reach of the firelight. "I was wrong," she whispered. "For years I blamed you for my father's death. I let hatred guide me here, and in doing so I hurt the one person who never deserved it." Tears gathered in her eyes, but she did not look away. "I'm so deeply sorry, Marcus. You opened your home to me, and I brought only pain." For a moment, something tender flickered across his face. He took one step toward her, but before he could speak, the library door opened again. Mr. Samuel Whitaker entered, rain still dripping from his coat. In his hand was a single letter, yellowed with age, sealed with the old Blackwood crest. "Your Grace," he said quietly, "this arrived from your late father's private papers. It was meant to be destroyed, but I believe Miss Langford has the right to see it." He placed the letter on the table. Marcus's face drained of color. Victoria picked it up with shaking hands. As she read, the words cut deeper than any knife. Her father had confessed everything, but the letter also revealed that Marcus had known part of the truth years ago. He had chosen silence. He had protected the family name, at the cost of letting her father carry the full weight of guilt alone. Victoria's breath caught in a painful gasp. "You knew?" Her voice broke. "You knew some of it, and you said nothing. All this time, you let me believe you were the villain." Marcus reached for her, but she stepped back, the letter trembling in her fingers. "Victoria, please listen." "No." Pain and betrayal flooded her eyes. "I trusted the beginning of something between us, and now I feel betrayed all over again." The room grew unbearably quiet, broken only by the roar of rain outside. Lady Beatrice Langford appeared in the doorway, her face pale but determined. She had clearly been listening. "Enough, Beatrice," said, her voice steadier than Victoria had ever heard it. She walked to her sister's side and took her hand. "Father used both of us. He used me too, promising me a brilliant marriage while he drained every resource behind my back. I was too ashamed to tell you." Beatrice looked at Marcus, then back at Victoria. "But this man, he protected what was left of our family's honor when he didn't have to. That doesn't excuse his silence, but it doesn't make him a monster either." Victoria's shoulders shook with silent sobs. Marcus stood frozen, the weight of old choices crashing down on him. Later, when Beatrice had gently led her sister away, Marcus remained alone in the library. Lord Thomas Harrington found him there, staring into the dying fire. "You're pushing her away, aren't you?" Thomas asked softly. Marcus's voice was rough with emotion. "I should. The darkness in my family, in her family, it will only swallow her whole. She deserves better than this cage of lies." Thomas placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "Or perhaps she deserves a man brave enough to step out of the shadows with her." Marcus closed his eyes, pain etched deeply into every line of his face. He wanted to protect Victoria. He wanted to keep her safe from the poison of the past. But the thought of watching her walk away felt like losing the only light that had entered his cold world in years. In her room, Victoria sat on the edge of the bed, the crumpled letter still in her lap. Her heart was breaking, yet somewhere beneath the hurt, a fragile flame still burned. A flame that whispered she might still choose forgiveness, if only Marcus would find the courage to tell her the whole truth at last. The grand ballroom of Langford Estate glittered under 1,000 candles, but the air felt heavy with expectation. London's elite had gathered for the season's most anticipated ball, unaware that tonight would change everything. Marcus Blackwood stood at the top of the staircase, his tall frame dressed in formal black, his face pale but resolute. Lord Thomas Harrington stood quietly at his side, offering silent strength. Mr. Samuel Whitaker waited near the entrance, the final documents safely tucked in his coat. Victoria watched from the shadows of the balcony above her heart, hammering so loudly she feared the entire room could hear it. She had spent the last few days in quiet agony, forgiving her father in the silence of her heart, forgiving herself for the hatred she'd carried for so long. Now she waited, hoping the man she had grown to love would find the courage she had finally found. Marcus stepped forward into the center of the ballroom. The music faded. Conversations died away. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the Duke of Westhaven. His voice, when it came, was steady, yet carried the weight of years of hidden pain. Ladies and gentlemen, I have lived too long behind the shield of silence. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Tonight I stand before you, not as a duke protecting his name, but as a man choosing truth over pride. He turned slowly until his eyes found Victoria on the balcony. Many years ago, a betrayal nearly destroyed my family. I chose to bury part of that truth to preserve honor. In doing so, I hurt innocent people, including the woman who now holds my heart. His voice softened, yet every word rang clear. Miss Victoria Langford, I wronged you. I allowed you to carry blame that was never yours to bear. For that, I am truly sorry. Truly. Gasps echoed across the ballroom. Victoria's breath caught. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she slowly descended the stairs, her silk gown whispering against the marble. Marcus continued his gaze, never leaving hers. Tonight, with the help of Mr. Samuel Whitaker, the full truth will be revealed. The man responsible for the deepest wounds, my own cousin Derek Caldwell, will face the consequences of his greed and manipulation. Derek, standing near the back, turned deathly white as two gentlemen stepped forward to escort him away. Marcus took a step toward Victoria as she reached the bottom of the stairs. I cannot change the past, he said, voice rough with emotion, but I can choose how I face the future. He slowly lowered himself to one knee before her, right there in the middle of the glittering ballroom, in front of the entire ton. The room fell into absolute silence. Victoria, my light in the darkness. His hand reached for hers, trembling slightly. I ask you not out of duty, not out of obligation, and not to repair any family name. I ask you because you have healed something in me I thought was broken forever. His gray eyes shone with unshed tears. Will you marry me? Not as my duchess, but as the woman I love with every piece of my scarred heart. Victoria looked down at him, her chest tight with overwhelming emotion. She saw the fear in his eyes, the same fear she had carried for so long. She saw the hope. She saw the man who had chosen truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. A soft smile broke through her tears. Yes, Marcus, she whispered, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed room. I will marry you because I love you. Not for what you were, but for who you have become. Marcus rose slowly and pulled her into his arms. The kiss they shared was tender, deep, and full of every unsaid word between them. Forgiveness, healing, and a love finally set free. The ballroom erupted in applause. Later that night, long after the guests had gone, Marcus and Victoria stood together on the quiet terrace under a sky finally cleared of rain. He held her close, his chin resting gently against her hair. I was so afraid I would lose you, he murmured. Victoria tilted her face up to him, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. You almost did. But love, real love, is stronger than even the darkest secrets. Lord Thomas Harrington watched from a distance with a small, satisfied smile, before quietly slipping away. Mr. Samuel Whitaker had already begun the legal work that would bring final justice to the old wounds. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Marcus pressed a lingering kiss to Victoria's forehead. Thank you, he whispered, for teaching me that facing the truth doesn't destroy us, it sets us free. Victoria smiled, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of the heart that now belonged completely to her. In that quiet moment, the shadows of the past finally began to fade, and in their place, a new light began to shine, bright, warm, and full of promise. This story reminds us that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to speak truth, offer forgiveness, and let love heal even the deepest wounds.